Talk now to Candice Holdsworth, writer and commentator, because the story that has been shocking Britain was even more shocking, I suppose, for a lot of people last night when the name came out and it turned out that it was Huw Edwards. Candice, good morning to you.
Morning.
We hear a lot about the duty of care now that the BBC owes to Huw Edwards, but it would be right to say, would it not, that they also owe a duty of care to an awful lot of people who appear to have been the subject of his interest, perhaps unwanted interest, during the last few years when they were working at the BBC?
Yes, I mean, that's like the big new development now, which was covered on Newsnight, that there are colleagues of his coming forward and alleging that he behaved inappropriately to them, which I think underlines the fact that this is a genuine story. It is a significant story. People have been wanting to dismiss the story, saying that whatever takes place between consenting adults is of no interest to the public. But I don't think that's quite true. If there is a situation in which someone, very high profile, in a position of power, may have been misusing that position, and I'm just speaking theoretically, allegedly, not saying it did happen, then that is worthy of investigation. It might not rise to the level of criminality, but it can still be inappropriate. And so then an organization must investigate it. And that's very, very, very important. I remember a few years ago, Louis Theroux did a good program on this about what happens on university campuses when there are these sorts of disagreements between students. It's not something that the police would necessarily be interested in, but nevertheless, the behavior is wrong and it needs to be dealt with.
Well, that's right, because at the end of the day, the BBC is going to have an awful lot of questions to answer here, particularly questions that need answering in the news department. And there are two women whose names have not really been mentioned in any of this. There's Jess Brammer, who's the editor of BBC News, and Deborah Turness, formerly the head of news and current affairs at NBC in America. She's head of news and current affairs at the BBC now, in charge of 6,000 journalists. Now, you can't tell me that neither of them knew that there might be a problem with their main news presenter sending messages inappropriately to people, particularly to young people, in a sort of a habitual manner.
Yeah, from what I'm hearing, BBC staff are very unhappy with the way that this has been dealt with because it's bringing their organisation into disrepute. I mean, they should have known that when they were first approached by the parents of this child, who came to them to ask them to deal with what they saw was a damaging relationship to their child and alleging that certain things had happened when their child was underage. They should have known from the experience of Jimmy Savile and then obviously all the huge interest in what happened with Philip Schofield, that this could be a huge story and a damaging story. And so it needs to be dealt with very quickly and very efficiently. And it just seems like that didn't happen and that they underestimated just how much people would be shocked by this, would be interested by this, and, you know, possibly the extent of it as well, because obviously new people have come forward and alleged that things have happened.
Yeah, absolutely right. And the investigation, in a way, we don't know how long it's going to go on for, but they're kind of, you know, while people on the woke side of the news business complain about tabloids exposing, you know, terrible things that they shouldn't have exposed, meanwhile the BBC is exposing even more every single day.
Yeah, it makes no sense. I mean, to sort of frame this as the BBC versus the tabloids is wrong, because the BBC itself and BBC journalists themselves clearly see this as a legitimate story. And I think that reveals more about the people saying that. I mean, their disdain and their distaste for certain newspapers, for certain media. The fact of the matter is that this is a highly complex story. You know, yes, there may have been no crime involved, but I think that what's being alleged is of interest to the public because obviously the person involved is so high profile and they are funded by the taxpayer. And of course, they have to maintain a certain image, presenting news in the way that they do. So it absolutely is of interest. You know, some people might just see it as gossip, as he said, she said, but I don't think so. You know, especially when we're talking about abuses of power here, you know, that is something that people are interested in and do want to know about. I mean, I haven't liked the witch hunting that's taken place on Twitter. Absolutely not. There was a total Salem atmosphere last weekend. I mean, lots of people were being wrongly accused. That I don't like. That I disagree with. But I think the story itself is a legitimate one to have been published by the Sun, and it is worthy of investigation.
Yeah, but I again would lay the blame for that solely at the door of the BBC, because the BBC has a duty to convince Huw Edwards in that particular case that the name will come out eventually. It might be better to have the name out there sooner rather than later. That would have stopped all of that, because as a result of not doing that, they allowed the story to kind of run away with itself and take on a life of its own. And so, you know, eventually it was Huw Edwards' own wife who decided to tell everybody it was him in order to kind of stop the outpouring of what they saw as unnecessary targeting, you know, and so that has been the case, and the BBC probably sitting back and not knowing what to do and kind of you know, being sort of paused like a rabbit in the headlights hasn't helped.
No, I mean, this is what Jeremy Vine said, and he was highly criticised for it, that perhaps now is the time for the person to name themselves, because it's attracting so much negative attention. There's huge amounts of speculation. But he did say it's their decision and their decision alone. I can understand why he didn't want to name himself, because he knew that hellfire was going to rain down upon him. But at some point, it obviously was going to come out, so it was better to do it sooner rather than later. And, you know, his wife is the one who has done it. I feel very sorry for the family, for her and for the kids. It must be pretty terrible. I can't imagine how difficult it must be for them right now.
Absolutely. It must be dreadful. Stay with us if you will, Candice. We've got other stories to talk about, of course, as well. This is the Independent Republican, Mike Graham, back after this.